In 1998, the National Research Council, with support from the National Science Foundation, formed a committee of experts from a variety of fields of expertise to study current research and practice in educational assessment. Concerns stemming from assessment practices in education prompted the study. After 3 years of intensive study and review, the committee published its findings in a book entitled Knowing What Students Know. The book explains a framework of assessment that they labeled the assessment triangle. The 3 key, highly interrelated components of assessment that make up the triangle are cognition, observation, and interpretation. These 3 individual components interact to produce a whole that is greater than the sum of its individual parts. The whole is effective assessment practice. It is the intent of this video to help you explore each of the individual components and to develop an understanding of effective assessment which stems from valid, reliable, and fair strategies in each step of the assessment process. Cognition refers to the need to organize assessment strategies around a research-based cognitive theory that explains how students learn in a particular content domain and how they learn in general. While it is true that not all students learn in the same way, effective assessment will provide immediate feedback about whether or not a student engages in self-monitoring as she attempts to understand new ideas, and whether or not the problem-solving strategy the student applies during a learning episode is effective. Additionally, assessment must attempt to discover how the student organizes acquired information in the brain. Does he have a schema that supports recall, or are isolated facts organized randomly, which makes recall and use more difficult? Cognitive science has provided educators with considerable knowledge about the architecture of the brain and the roles of both short-term or working memory and long-term memory. These cognition characteristics influence learning and must be assessed. Effective assessment is also organized around knowledge of the syntax or structure of a discipline. Each academic discipline has a structure or syntax which distinguishes it from other bodies of knowledge. Educators must have a comprehensive understanding of the content of a discipline. Understanding the specifics of the knowledge, conventions, methods of inquiry, and functions of a discipline provide insight into the hierarchical structure within the discipline and the interrelatedness among disciplines. Such knowledge facilitates recognition of prior learning that students must have internalized before they can be successful in understanding subsequent building blocks of the discipline. Without a comprehensive understanding of the hierarchical structure of a discipline, key concepts may not be taught or assessed, thus leaving holes in the student's understanding that cause later confusions and misperceptions. Although all 3 aspects of the assessment triangle are important and must be aligned, according to researchers, a model of learning must be the cornerstone of the assessment design process. Without an understanding of how students learn and without specific knowledge about the syntax or structure of the content domain, both instruction and its assessment are at best hit and miss. The observation corner of the assessment triangle refers to knowledge of the types of tasks and situations that will enable the student to demonstrate their competence in the content discipline. Assessment developers must be aware of alternative assessment tasks and situations that are best suited to gather information about the intended learning outcome in a reliable and fair way to support valid inferences about student competence. The choice of assessment task stems from the model of learning. Deciding whether to judge student competence through paper and pencil tasks or performance-based assessments depends on how students best acquire the knowledge or skill in a discipline and what type of data is needed to support a particular inference. Whatever the choice, it is important that assessment tasks demonstrate the student's thinking process as he completes the assessment. The third and interdependent component of the assessment triangle is interpretation. This factor is concerned with the type of analysis that will be done to develop reliable inferences about student competence from the data gathered through the observation tasks. In large-scale assessment situations, formal, complex statistical methods which demonstrate patterns of behavior or understanding are used. In classroom assessment, less formal statistical analyses are applied. Such informal methods of interpretation might be as simple as a ranking of numerical scores from highest to lowest and determining an average or median score. Each of these three components, cognition, observation, and interpretation, contains a knowledge base of its own that educators must acquire and apply when designing assessment of any type, whether it be classroom assessment or school-wide or broader. A crucial point is that each of these three elements of the assessment triangle must not only make sense on its own, but each must also connect to the other two. For example, a cognitive theory of how people develop competence in a domain provides clues about the types of observations that will elicit evidence about that competence. Additionally, a cognitive theory of how people develop competence in a domain also provides clues about types of interpretation methods that are appropriate for transforming the data about student performance into assessment results. In developing a comprehensive assessment program, it is not enough that the three major components of the assessment triangle align with and support one another. The assessment plan developed must also complement curriculum and instructional goals. Curriculum, instruction, and assessment must align. The three functions must be directed to the same ends and reinforce each other rather than working at cross purposes. Ideally, an assessment should measure what students are actually being taught, and what is actually being taught should parallel the curriculum that students are expected to learn. In the book, Knowing What Students Know, there is a reminder of three important principles for all educators to keep in mind about the assessment process. 1. Assessment is a process of reasoning from evidence. 2. Assessments are imprecise to some degree. 3. Assessment results are only estimates of what a person knows and can do. I would add a fourth principle. Assessment begins with the end in mind. After all, a Google map will do you no good if you don't know where you're going. Experience and training influence our perceptions, our thinking, our emotions, and our actions. As teachers, these factors influence what and how we teach and how we judge and interpret students' success. Because of the considerable impact we have on the lives of others, it is imperative that we are aware of the conscious and subconscious connections in our minds about teaching and learning. Without awareness, we tend to allow others to make important decisions for us. We tend to follow the latest new ideas or rely on the sage advice of admired colleagues or mentors. We make monumental decisions each day about how we will let students experience new ideas and skills, and about how they will be able to demonstrate their mastery. Teachers constantly make judgments about the academic prowess, needs, and level of mastery of students. Evaluation is required of us, and so is assessment. As molders of another's future, we are expected to draw and report valid inferences based on data that we have gathered through reliable and fair means. When we misjudge, students experience the consequences. For some, these judgments affect them for a lifetime.